Let's talk about bass pegs. Bass pegs are completely different than the rest of the string world because they're mechanical in the big, huge, clunky gear sense instead of a wooden peg that goes through the instrument. So let's go through the bass pegs and make sure we're talking parts so we all know what we're talking about. And so the wording we're using is the same. And then let's talk about the standard problems with the bass pegs. So on any standard bass peg, we've got the peg, the wing nut itself. So this guy here is the wing nut that we're actually touching. And then this is on what's called a worm gear. So it stays in one place, and as it spins around, it moves everything else. So you've got the wing nut out here. You've got the worm gear that the wing nut's attached to. Then you've got the actual gear itself. So this big round piece here is the gear. And you've got the gear screw. So right in the middle of this, there's a screw that a screwdriver can go into. You got the gear screw, because then that gear itself can actually come up and off of there. Then you actually have the peg itself, and the peg is the part that actually goes into the peg box that the strings are wrapping around, and it sticks through this part here. So what we normally do is that peg gets inserted through the hole, then this big plate is set down on top of it and is screwed in on at least 6, if not 8 spots that is screwed down to the scroll itself. So that peg sits, and that hole in underneath this plate is actually quite larger, so that whole thing can slide through there. Now typically this has, the peg itself on this end has 2 flat spots and 2 slightly curved spots. And if you look real close on this gear, you can see how there's flat walls down on this side and then curved wall on this side. So flat wall up top, curved on these 2 sides, and flat down here as well. And that's how the gear grabs a hold of the peg and actually turns it. Now when they're made of pot metal like this, and this is a really inexpensive gear, really cheaply made, what ends up happening is the peg itself gets smashed like this. And you can see how this thing is just all sorts of ski-wampus, looks awful. And if I turn the thing around, you can see how it's just got pieces falling off this thing. It just looks ugly. There's no flat edge to this anymore. But if you find the right spot on it, it might actually squish in. So there is a slightly flatter side than others to get a hold of this. And so this guy does function by turning the gear, which turns the peg. But I tell you what, these cheap ones, they're awful. So those are the parts. Let's go talk about what the problems are. So the very first problem that we end up with on these is just that. They're made of poor quality materials and things squish out of the way. So that in that peg itself, where it goes into the gear, it doesn't actually fit. And that's usually what the very first problem is on the inexpensive basses, is that gear flat edge to the peg gets stripped out. At that point, you're done. You may be able to, if you have other older instruments or parts from old instruments laying around, you might be able to swap that peg out and still use the original gear. And that works, but that requires that you've got a boneyard of parts out there. So if you're ever throwing basses away, I highly recommend you save those parts. Strip the bass mechanisms off, throw them in a box, put them in the corner of underneath the sink in the room somewhere, and maybe you might ever need to get back into that. But that's really about the only option. Most repair shops don't stock individual parts like that. I know I don't. I don't keep very many repair parts on bass mechanisms because I don't want that box in my shop. I've got too much stuff in here already. So typically what we do is we just replace the entire mechanism because that one part has been stripped out. How horrible is that? The screws are nothing serious. So if you ever lose a screw, if one happens to back out or some moronic little child just decides to start taking a screwdriver to their instrument and loses it, that's no big deal. These come in very standard thread pitches, so you can go to the hardware store, take another one out, take it with you to the hardware store like an Ace Hardware or True Value, and say, I need another screw like this, and they can find the same thread pitch that's about the same length with the ginormous head on it. If you can't find with a really broad head like that, get a washer on it, and you can make these things work, right? So it doesn't have to be, will it be as beautiful? No, but it'll function. The next major issue that happens on string basses is these wings get bent. You can imagine what's happening. This is a big instrument, and the students are trying to throw these things around, and they've got this ginormous piece of metal that's kind of skinny sticking out the back end, and they are easy to get a hold of and bend. So oftentimes these will get bent, and that makes it really hard to turn inside of this little hoop of material that is sneaking over that holds this worm gear in. Oftentimes then what I'll use is just a soft mallet, so a canvas mallet like that, or I'll go to the band room and grab one of their Bell mallets that has a rawhide mallet on it, and I'll come in here and just tap that back to where it's straight. Sometimes I'll grab a whacker bar, so this is a Delrin rod, and I'll stick that inside of there and come in and go bam on those to get these things to move around. And that's how we get those to straighten back out. So really, if we've bent a wing nut like this, it's no big deal. Take a hammer or something to it and whack it back till it's straight. You're probably not going to cause that much damage to it. The one thing that I have seen happen is the solder spot. So this big wing is actually soldered into this spot here. And occasionally that will come loose and will start to rattle around a little bit. So there have been several teachers that have searched forever trying to find the buzz in the instruments. And that buzz is actually right here. If you don't have a soldering iron, which I don't expect you do, oftentimes what we'll do is just drop super glue down inside there to keep that thing a little bit more solid and keep it from rattling, and it fixes the problem. The next major issue that happens on basses is the gear here, the teeth in the gear actually get stripped out. So it has twisted or bound up somehow, and as we're turning it, the worm gear has just chewed the teeth away on this big one. The only real option you have at that point is to replace that gear. Here again is where a boneyard comes in really handy. If you can find another bass gear that fits the mechanism. And that may be the trick. Every now and then, one manufacturer to the next, they have different size parts. And so it might work, it might not. But having the boneyard, again, it would come in handy if you've got several instruments in your inventory to steal a part out of. Do they sell individual gear parts? No, of course not. That would be way too easy. We can't find them anywhere. I have seen somebody try to 3D print them, but the amount of pressure that's put on this is actually quite high, so it strips them out. That being said, they last 4 to 6 months for a really inexpensive plastic gear. Fine, print 6 of those right now and you've got the next 2 years worth of material. Not a bad idea. Does it look goofy? Well, it doesn't shine, but nobody's looking. They don't care. As long as it's in tune, nobody cares. So there's a couple options for you out there. And there's mostly just stealing you've got to replace the gear. The next issue that happens with basses is this band of material here. So this material is actually clipped into this flat piece here, and it holds the worm gear down. Oftentimes what happens is there'll be enough tension or torque on all of this that it pulls up. So this worm gear is being pulled up against that and actually breaks the clip out from underneath this. That one is repairable. You have to unscrew the gears. So you take these big screws out here, pull the gear off, and you'll do that on both of these, and then you can take these screws out here. Hey, I just want to jump in real quick. I hope you're getting something out of this video. If you want to learn more about instrument repair, go check out all the videos and courses that we have available at repairmasterclass.com, where we teach musicians how to fix musical instruments. Then when we do this, we can actually take this whole mechanism right up off of here. Now when you flip this mechanism over, this is where you can actually see these barbs actually go in and curl over like this. So that plate right there goes in and wraps around and grabs a hold right there. So oftentimes you can put that back in there and bend that plate back over and smack it back down with a hammer and get these to flatten out. Once you've got that all squished back together and everything pinched back down, then it's just a matter of putting this back on and screwing this back down into place. Those are your primary issues that you end up with on a bass peg. Very simple mechanisms, very easy to fix and maintain. Just takes, all my tools so far have been a screwdriver and a little bit of a hammer and a flat blade screwdriver. That's it. Really simple stuff to make a big amount of difference on all your bass mechanisms.